Fantastic. Welcome everyone to this session here at the RDA Plenary. This is a Birds of a Feather session, or BoF, on skills and training curriculums to support FAIR for research software. I'm just going to start with some welcome to you all. It's fantastic to have people joining this session. It's fantastic to all be here at the RDA yet again for another fantastic plenary. There's lots of interesting sessions happening and good networking available as well. Some housekeeping details first. The collaborative notes are available through the Hoover platform. It links to the same link that we're given here. Within the notes, there's also a link to these slides if you'd like to access a copy. And just a reminder, of course, in terms of meeting etiquette, we are all working under the RDA Code of Conduct. This webinar, this BoF is set up as a Zoom webinar, which means you can each unmute to speak directly. But what we'd ask at the moment is if you have questions or comments, to please put them in the Q&A or in the chat, or you can put them directly into the notes document. And then when we have a couple of sessions on the agenda where we can have some discussion, people can unmute and chat then. Please be aware that this session is being recorded and it will be made publicly available to RDA plenary attendees in the next couple of days. This is the agenda for today, which is also included in the collaborative notes. So I'm Michelle Barker, the Director of the Research Software Alliance, and I'll give a bit of background to how we ended up having this session. Then we'll have some talks from some of the research data initiatives that are already doing fantastic work around skills and training curriculums for research data, and then think about with this backdrop of having so much happening in the data space, how could we learn from these before then having some talks from some of the exciting initiatives already happening around research software training and curriculums, and then ending with a discussion on what we've learned and what we might want to think about doing next. Is there some opportunity for some kind of alignment? So this slide reiterates what I've just said, that we're trying to highlight the importance of identifying our software skills by looking at some of the initiatives already underway and some of the rationale for this session, learn what's happening in the data world and think about what we might want to do as a group together. So I will now talk for the next 10 minutes or so to give some background information on why it's important to be having this discussion and why now is the right time to be having this discussion, and what will be some of the benefits of having potentially some more alignment on FAIR for research skills and training curriculums. Sorry. So we're probably all aware that there's been a growing emphasis on digital skills. It's been one of the silver linings of COVID that at least it's helped many people in different parts of the world understand the importance of digital literacy and digital connectivity, but it's also heightened awareness of the need for digital skills in the research sector. So this is some work, this is a list of some of the pieces that have also been reinforcing that are helping national governments and funders and publishers and organisations also think about how to improve this kind of skill set in their staff. So UNESCO have been drafting the recommendation on open science, and one of their recommendations highlights investing in human resources, training, educational, digital literacy, etc. The European Open Science Cloud, in fact, have their first objective to ensure that open science practices and skills are rewarded and taught, becoming the new normal. And the OECD finished a report in 2020 and that I was the chair of on building the digital workforce capacity and skills for data-intensive science. So there's a lot of interest at broad strategic levels on how we can build this kind of expertise in the research sector. We'll be hearing from some of the work that's happening in the sector already today, but I wanted to highlight that there's a range of other things happening or other initiatives that we could have been invited to talk and that we hope to involve in future conversations. So there's pieces that look very broadly at how we recognise digital skills or open science skills in research. So initiatives like Credit and the SFIA. There's work that looks specifically at teaching different types of open science skills, including software and coding. So the Carpentries and Software Sustainability Institute are good examples of those. And then there are other pieces that might teach a bit of software and coding, but also have much broader agendas around reproducible research or open science or educational methods. So examples there include the Turing Way, open life science, and meta docentia. Alongside this growing interest in digital skills, there's been this growing emphasis on FAIR for research software. So I'm part of an RDA Research Software Alliance and Force 11 working group that's been looking at how we apply the FAIR principles, FAIR being findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, to research software. Obviously, they've been applied extensively to research data, and now a range of groups are thinking about how to apply them to other digital objects. So there's this work that's been going on from another working group. They had a session some hours ago, and we'll have another one in 24 hours to try and apply the principles, the FAIR principles, to research software, and now have an almost final draft of what those new principles look like when applied to research software. And we also have these ground up grassroots initiatives happening as well, such as the growth of the research software engineering or RSE movement. Over the last 10 years, people in roles in the research sector who are involved in creating software and coding are identifying themselves as a research software engineer. There's also people who, of course, are in the research sector who do some software or coding and don't identify themselves as research software engineers, but a number of people have, and there's been some fantastic movements led by the Society of RSE in the UK that have led to the evolution now of an international council of a range of national RSE associations, and we even see new national or regional associations coming up like RSE Asia. So all of this means that we now have a lot of pieces in play. We have broad frameworks on what open science skills could look like. We have specific pieces on what some types of RSEs might need in a particular discipline or in a particular context. And we have imperatives coming down from organizations like OECD and UNESCO saying it would be good if you were thinking about more about digital skills for research. And one of the questions, the key question, I guess, of the BoF today is, how do we bring these pieces together? Would some kind of increased alignment be useful? Where can we look at there's overlaps and commonalities and think about where we might want to join some of those pieces so that they form a more coherent whole? So that was a bit of an introduction to why we're here today and some of the things that we hope to talk about. So we will now have a couple of talks from some of the research data initiatives who are already providing useful frameworks around skills and training curriculums for data in an open science context so that we can then think about what we could learn from those. So I'll pass now to Hugh Shanahan, who's going to share the recording for the first talk and then give his talk. And as I said before, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat or the notes, and then we'll have some discussion after the two talks to pick up on them then.
All right. Thanks very much, Michelle. So first, what we're going to do is actually show a short video from Laura Malloy, who's actually in the audience tonight or this morning. Just as a quick heads up, I'm just going to try and use a tool which hopefully will make sure that the audio is a lot clearer. It might also completely break. In which case, if you can't hear anything if you can't hear Laura talking at all, please feel free to shout and say, "Hang on, there's a problem here," because I won't know myself. I'll just hear Laura speaking. So let me know if you can't hear any audio, and I'll go and get that fixed. So if you can give me 1 second just to do that, I'll need to disappear off the audio now.
Thanks, Hugh, and thanks to all those people who are joining at crazy hours, particularly the Europeans for whom it is very late.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Laura Malloy, and I'm very pleased to be participating in this BoF session. I'm the Senior Research Lead at CoData. CoData is the Committee on Data for the International Science Council here in Paris, and we work on data policy, data science, and data skills issues for the benefit of science and society. Today, I'm going to be talking about the terms for fair skills terminology to describe the skills of making and keeping data fair. It can be understood as a fair data stewardship terminology. And today I want to note that I'm speaking on behalf of our wider community, and more on that in a second. First of all, you can access and examine the terms for fair skills terminology at the link on the slide. It's openly available under a CC BY license. It's stored on GitHub for the community to inspect and use. Now, I'd like to just very quickly share why and how we built the terminology and what we were thinking about as we went forward with development. So the scope for the Terms for Fair Skills initiative was to build a terminology for the competences, skills, and knowledge necessary to make data fair and to keep it fair. And the Terms for Fair Skills terminology draws on the expertise of a wide range of project partners, and you can see those on the slide here. They've been giving their time and expertise, and we, of course, are always happy to hear from anybody who'd like to get involved or who would like to carry out a use case with the terminology. And we've been thinking together about the need for this terminology and working to make it a reality since about January 2019, so quite some time. And as part of our thinking together, we've come up with 4 main uses for such a terminology. And you can see this on the slide here. So the first one would be to help with discovery, retrieval, description, and comparison of fair enabling training materials and resources. Secondly, in the design, creation, assessment, and comparison of research data curricula, of data stewardship curricula. Obviously, a terminology for fair skills is useful in the curriculum building process. And related to that, in training, it would help those who teach fair data skills in having a stable set of definitions for those skills. It's also useful in this way for anyone who's undertaking an audit of their own skills gaps, or for managers, for example, to understand and map the skills base in their own team for project planning, or for recruitment purposes, or perhaps as part of an appraisal process. And finally, when thinking about the formalization offered by a terminology, this helps people to define skills clearly and consistently for job descriptions. And from the perspective of the other end of the process, if you're writing a CV or filling out an application for a new role, it allows you to work with recognized structured competences. And of course, many other people have thought about some or all of these aspects, and during our work, we've been consulting some other recent pieces of research and glossary or framework development in relevant areas, and learning lessons from these and examining the value that they offer. And you can explore these through the links here. So it was very important to us that the terminology delivered a broad and pragmatic initial spread of terms. We didn't want it to be drawn too far down the direction of one particular research area, or discipline or profession. So how we did this in practice was to ensure that there were at least a couple of sets of training materials in the mix from different contexts as we worked together on the terminology development and testing across that large group of stakeholders that you saw earlier. The 2 main use cases we worked on are on the slide, namely the Elixir training materials, which are delivered via the test platform, and also the CoData RDA Schools of Research Data Science, and specifically those materials from there that have been created during the life of the EU Fairs Fair project. We were fortunate enough to gain funding from the EOSC Co-Creation Fund for a small group of 3 team members. So that was Oxford's Data Readiness Group and Fair Sharing at Oxford, represented by ontologist Pete McQuilton and then ontologist Alison Lister. And we've also had ontologist Jan Lefranc from eScience Data Factory, and also myself, to develop the terminology and to communicate its value between the end of 2020 and early 2021 towards a version 0.1 or proof of concept version. So as part of this project, we had a series of hack sessions, and colleagues from the projects that I mentioned earlier came to the hack sessions with their materials and with their ideas and with their energy, and gave us loads of really useful feedback. And this feedback was applied in the Web Prodigy collaborative editing environment online. And here's a very quick view of what that looked like when it was in Web Prodigy. And then once we have a stable version of the terminology, each time we had that, we delivered it to GitHub, and it was available there under a CC BY license for the community to inspect and use and feedback on. And another nice thing about this project is that we delivered feedback on the development of the Semaphora annotation tool that's been derived from the EUDAT B2 Note tool, and allows the user via a Chrome plugin to add semantic tags, free text keywords, and comments to online resources using the tool. So that's been a useful additional benefit to this work. And if you're interested to know more, please get in touch and I can connect you with some of our team if you don't know them already. So just to wrap up, where do things stand today? Well, we have the proof of concept terminology, which has been built iteratively in an open and fair way following best practices. For example, each term has an IRI. We have around 500 terms. Around a third of those have been imported from the CoData RDA terminology. The project page really is the key resource, and it has all the information you could possibly need, including a direct link to the repository, which is another link on this slide. And the EOSC technical report is available on Zenodo for much more information. And of course, there's the benefits from the Semaphora annotation tool development, which, as I mentioned, has been another set of benefits to the work of the project over the last year or so. So what happens next? Well, we're going to continue development, and that will continue to be visible on GitHub through the same link, as you can see on the slide here. And we're planning a working group supported through CoData, which will bring together the community to continue to progress review cycles and explore funding opportunities and so on. So if you're interested, please get in touch. And actually, if you'd like to know anything more about any of the points I've covered, do just contact me. The email's on the slide there, Laura@CoData. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. That was great. So if it's all right, I just will move on swiftly on to the next talk, which is by me, which is to talk about various. Actually, I'll talk about two specific training initiatives that are related to sort of data issues. So in particular, what I'm going to do is actually to talk about two efforts. So one that Laura mentioned already, which was the CoData RDA Schools for Research Data Science. The other one I want to talk about is the Data Steward Instructor Training, which is, sorry, I should present this. Yeah, that's better. The other is the Data Steward Instructor Training that's run in which is a collaboration between FAIR's FAIR, which is Laura already mentioned, another EU network called EOSC Synergy, and again the CoData RDA group. And then what hopefully I'll have is just some conclusions to draw at the end of that. So first of all, just to talk about the CoData RDA schools and what's the drive for that. So the goal of these particular schools is to create communities of researchers that have foundational data science skills to enable efficient and effective research for the 21st century. And just above there is the link to the web page for this particular initiative. So let me just explain what that school is about. What it's, at least up until pre-pandemic days, it was an intensive 2-week physical schools, very much creating a sort of a bonding experience for its students. It is Post-pandemic, or where we are right now, it's turned into an 11-week virtual school. So what we have is a whole series of sort of micro lectures and live sessions and questions and so on for people to work on. So previously, the 2-week physical school, we ran, lost count now, I think we ran 10 of those schools since 2016. We're right towards the tail end of our second virtual school. The key thing to note is that it's very much about delivering a broad but quite shallow curriculum. So you're just giving people a taster into a whole wide range of materials. So some are quite technical, some are less so. We're also very interested in making sure that our alumni really stay in touch and collaborate with each other. The focus here is very much on early career researchers in low and middle income countries. That's very much our priority. Although the curriculum we think is as good for high income countries as for LMICs. So what does that curriculum look like? And a thing to note is that this is actually a recognized output. The curriculum is a recognized output of the RDA. And it's covering a whole set of modules. Some of them you will recognize, for example, we're making use of software carpentry, the introductory materials there. It has a range of things, as I said, which are kind of technical, like the software carpentry type of things, computational infrastructures, visualization. But we also embedded in there is things which are happening, which are much more sort of data related. So, for example, open and responsible research and research data management. All right. So one day it's really spending a day hard work in front of a laptop doing this business. And then the other time it's much more about discussion based, much more seminar based and so on. So it's 2 weeks. You're really kind of spending a half a day to a day on any one of these individual topics. So again, just to note, the schools does this sort of broad but shallow introduction, and it's and so it really is just trying to show ECRs there's a lot of different things that they need to understand going forward in terms of working with their data. The other sort of training activity that I wanted to talk about is the Data Steward Instructor training. And in that, as you said, that's a shared activity between FAIR's FAIR, CoData RDA Schools, and EOSC Synergy. What's very, very important here to note about this is to understand where data stewards are in terms of how new are they to the job, how many other people do they have in their institution. And we noticed in terms of conversations across Europe was that data stewards are, in the first instance, usually very, very new to their roles. Like the majority in our workshops are actually there for less than 6 months. And the other point is that for the most part, they're either on their own or in a small team. All right, so newly employed and in a small team. So in many respects, these are individuals who are, they're in one higher education institute typically, and they are very much sort of sitting on their own, newly appointed and thinking, oh, what do I do? So we really needed to think hard about what it was that we were covering there. And we came up with, this is our sort of finalized version of the curriculum that we cover, which is basically 3 half days that are run entirely online. And they range from introducing the ideas behind data stewardship, moving on to thinking about FAIR, in talking about pedagogy, because it's really important. They spend a lot of their time actually communicating, moving on then to responsible and open research, DMPs, and then finally something called service models for research data management. In other words, looking at their institution and saying, oh, okay, how do I bring up to look at the services that I'm running in my particular institution? So as I said, these are all done They're done in 3 half days, kind of a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday, so people have a little bit of time to reflect on them. And then what we're doing is that there's lots of sort of team exercises and so on. So we also generally run these on a national or regional basis, so that actually people, all those people who might feel very isolated in their institution, suddenly realize, oh, hang on, actually, there are people who are down the road from me who are in precisely the same boat as I am. And what's an important point is that we're not trying to teach everything here, that we're actually trying to get these people to know each other and be willing to work together kind of going forward, which is an important step. So that's some details there about how that program looks like. And there's a link there to an example program as well, if you'd like to look at that. Let me just finally go to the conclusions that have come out from these 2 initiatives. So the first thing is that in many respects, these are both of these programs are the results of actually iterative improvement that, since 2016, the CoData RDA Schools has been developing and evolving. Its evolution is that we think we're pretty happy with the curriculum that was there, but it needed some efforts. Likewise, the Data Steward instructor training courses, again, they've required something like 2.5 years of work to get to that point. What's really important that Laura has pointed out, that having the infrastructure in there to find materials is really, really important, because there's lots of materials that are out there that we can use. The other thing also to note is that with the development of the curriculum, and that's a really, really important activity. I'm not, saying, well, that's not important, is to understand the audience that you have, all right, and what are their constraints. Also think about them as a community, because in many respects, what you're doing here in both of these activities, whether you're talking about data skills, or if we're thinking about, Fair for Research software, we're kind of bootstrapping what we know. And it's as much about building communities of people who stay in touch and sort of share their best practices and say, hey, I found this interesting thing here, and they learn together, which is also something which is hugely important. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to say there. I'm sorry I went a little over. I think at this point, Michelle asked me to kind of take the lead on the next part of this session, which was leading the first point of this discussion, which is what can we learn from these, the initiatives that we're just talking about here. So number 1 is terms for fair skills, which is really something that should appeal to all the computational people in there, which is really kind of like defining all of those skills and giving them proper labels, building a proper ontology to describe all of this. And then the other is the kind of teaching that's the kind of direct instances that are there. So does anybody at this point, the first thing is to ask is, do people have any sort of particular comments on what we've just talked about here, and can you see some parallels with what we've talked about?
Maybe I could kick things off by asking Laura a question. About if you wanted to extend the work that you're doing to include more on software, then what do you need? If the agenda today is to ask, what do we already know about what skills are needed to create fair research software, and what kind of awareness breakdown do we already have of those competencies, and who's already teaching them? Then, Laura, from your initiative's point of view, what is it you want to be able to go and find easily to just slot into your work to extend, to include more software?
To be honest, speaking at it from the community liaison point of view, because I'm not a terminologist, I think what's most important for me is that we have interaction with a wide group of people, including research software engineers, programmers, everybody who's working in this space, to participate, to download, to fork the terminology, have a look at it, see if it meets their needs, and feed into it, make suggestions, put their expertise into this. We have a team of 3 terminologists who do a sterling job, given that we're not funded at the moment, of working through any suggestions, any requests that come in to the terminology. And I think that's the most useful thing I can say, is it really needs to be a community effort, because we're very keen that it's not a top-down initiative. We're very keen that it's something that is co-created with user communities. And if there are user communities that are not already engaged with this work, with this kind of work, we'd really like to make sure that we're providing something useful. I think the other thing to point out is that the current vision for the terminology is that it describes training resources for making and keeping data fair. And so it doesn't currently have a software focus specifically. And so that might be something that could be a very useful direction to explore as one or several of new use cases. So if you are thinking about getting in touch, then please have a look at the terminology. I'm going to repost the link in a second. And yeah, check it out, mess around with it and see what you think, and see whether it's something that you would like to take and extend or work with, and give us your feedback. We'd be very happy to receive that.
So, okay, so Leila, you have a question here. Do you, so Leila asked, do you want to keep it oriented to fair only? Laura, I'll maybe throw that one at you again, if that's all right.
Yeah, so I work on 2 terminologies at the moment. One is the CoData RDA terminology, which was run by CoData until they asked us at CoData to come in and steward it. And that's not fair specific. And then this one is fair specific. So yeah, it's the clues in the name. It's a fair specific terminology, which does not suit everybody's purposes. But we're hoping that it does a double job. Firstly, one, a bit of advocacy for fair data and a bit of awareness raising. And secondly, to meet the needs of the communities who are thinking about fair data just now. But if you want a non-fair specific data, sorry.
I probably put the question at the wrong time in the chat. It's not about the
there's no wrong time, it's all good.
Not really about the terminologies. I have been looking at the discussion on the notes as well. It's about the skills. People are discussing on the notes the skill, what sort of skills you need to teach fair for research software. So my question is, do you want to keep it only tailored to fair?
For the purposes of this terminology, yes. I mean, that's the focus of it.
In terms of the broader discussion, yeah, I'll try and answer a bit in terms of the broader discussion, because I think that is an important question, Leila, that the background for this BoF grew out of the fact that the Fair for Research software principles have been developed, and we're now starting to ask questions about, well, how do you create a cadre of people who can utilize and teach those and implement the principles or continue to create a cadre of people. And that was kind of the impetus for this conversation, which is why it's called Fair for Research Software Skills and Training. But certainly even in my engagement with others in preparing this BoF, I've started to wonder if we need to start with a broader question on what research software skills and training curriculums need to look like, and where are the commonalities or key elements across them all. But it's a question for this group to consider.
Thank you, Michelle.
Definitely, and there's no implication by the existence of the terms for fair skills terminology that fair is all that matters. And I absolutely agree with Michelle on that point, that there's obviously a wider landscape as well that can partially overlap with fair, but they're not constituting two equivalent domains. So yeah, it's good to make sure that we think about what suits our particular use cases and our particular needs.
You then, Peter.
Yeah, so just also to add to that, you know, there's a huge amount of effort. I mean, basically, there's a lot of effort in terms of getting terms for fair skills off the ground, and it's still not quite. It's not yet at not far away from version 1. Laura, you might disagree. I don't think it's far away from version 1 at this point. So there's the kind of focus to try and get that done. But that said, remember, you know, the great thing about a terminology is that you can always use bits of it and repurpose them for one's own purposes. So all the definitions and so on are there. So terms for fair skills, about a third of the terms have been imported from CASRI already. So it's like, okay, now actually that's a gift that can then be passed on to you know, in terms of other things. I think the other thing that also, and it took me the ontologists working in this from day one were all the time sort of saying, think about the use case, always think about the use case. And it's that's a really, really important thing, which it took us time to kind of, for that community to figure out what were the things you wanted it for, which was a lot of it had to do with labeling materials. And it's kind of saying, okay, is that the same thing that needs to be achieved here with respect to thinking about research software and so on? So it's definitely, at the very least, elements can be used, and also to use the lessons learned from what the terms for fair skills community, in terms of saying, okay, figure out use cases and how to work those things. I think there's other things that could also be made use of there as well.
Exactly, and this is why the use cases are so important, and why I was keen to include them in the talk, because this is about a co-creation process with these different communities. Yeah. And as I said earlier, I'm really keen that we have really good examples from further communities to make sure that this terminology is as useful as possible. But there's no suggestion that it's there to cover absolutely every use case. I mean, it will not be right for some communities, some professional areas of activity, and that's fine. So if we can be of use to you, then please participate, is what I'm saying. So
thanks,
hopefully
Laura.
that's clear.
Peter, Nish?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Laura. I guess I wanted to ask about another community, which I'm doing some work as part of a group in, which is other like non-traditional research outputs, especially like creative outputs. I was wondering whether, again, is there scope around that, or what might be the gaps to apply FAIR for other non-traditional research outputs like creative works?
Do you see
that?
Like
me to oh, sorry, go ahead.
Laura. No, go, Laura.
Well, I was just going to say, Peter, you know, thank you for this. I'm an artist, actually, so I really feel very interested in your question. I mean, again, one of the things that is good to do with frameworks or with tools is to try and break them, right? So yeah, I guess it's just the same answer for me. I'm afraid it's case studies, get involved, send your projects, have a look at the repo, and see how would you apply this to the examples that you have in mind. I think it's a fabulous question, and I'd love to see what happens.
Great, thanks.
All right, well, hopefully that started some of our thinking going. We might now return to the talks. We've got 3 talks from some of the research software community members who are already teaching some of these skills to different audiences in different environments. So back to Hugh to take us through that.
Hi, my name is Julia Damore, and I will present the USRC Education and Training Working Group. But before I talk about the working group, I'll very briefly talk about USRC, the US Research Software Engineer Association. It's a community organization for people who write and contribute to research software. And it's for people who are doing the research software, implementing research software themselves, as well as people who are interested in the career path of a research software engineer, or that generally identifies allies of research software engineering. The mission of USRC is to provide a community for exchange, for knowledge exchange and networking, to advocate for the career path of an RC, to provide resources for groups and individuals, and to improve and promote the diversity within the RC community in the US. It's generally free to join, it's open to anyone. International participation is welcome, but any events are in US-centric time zones. So the Training Education Working Group started in 2021, in the spring this year. And we created it to discuss issues of education and training for RCs, with a goal to develop resources and strategies and to contribute to the establishment of a formal RC career path. So far, we've created three outcomes of this working group. We created a skills list that lists skills that many RCs have. We created a list of RC archetypes that tries to classify what the type of an RC. And we created a list of training materials that links out to existing training materials for RCs. I'll briefly talk about those before I then go on to talk about what we are planning to do next. So the skills list was initially developed at the second International RC Leaders Workshop in 2020. And it is based on the analysis of several job applications for RC positions. And then it was crowdsourced to get the input from the community. It is work in progress, by no means meant to be complete or the absolute truth. And we welcome any feedback. So I'm briefly gonna go to the website. This is it. We created several categories, or we categorized the skills we found into these different categories. And there are things like obviously implementation, but also testing, code reviews, UX design, things that many RCs do for their job. And it is not meant to be that this are all the skills that an RC has to have, but a list of skills and RCs, you typically have a subset of these. The next thing we did, or actually the first outcome of the working group, was a list of a classification of common RC profiles, which we developed to aid the development of educational resources to be able to specifically target specific types of RCs. And these are not yet up on the website, but hopefully will be soon. I'll just very briefly go over them here. They range from someone who has an undergraduate degree in computer science and no research experience whatsoever, to domain experts who basically have only research or experts in their field, but have no formal computer science training. From computer science researchers to people who have like some degree in computer science, some degree in domain science, industry software developers who come with best practice experience from the industry, but might have issues with the research side of things, all the way to someone who has a non-CS undergraduate degree and learns CS skills as they go. And then we developed a list of trainings, which tries to pull together existing trainings and classify them. And eventually we hope to link this to our skills list and to the archetype list so that someone could directly go to a specific skill and then find trainings for them, or go to what they classify themselves at and then see what might make sense for them to look at. So briefly going to go to the list of training materials. As you can see, it's not that many yet, but we're working on it. It's work in progress. We have collections of courses that are curated by other projects, and then we also have individual lectures, all provided from other projects and other institutions, organizations. Yeah. So that's what we've done so far. What's next is that we're thinking about how we can formalize RSE training. And that could be either as a certificate or as a master's degree at the university. Both of these have pros and cons, and certificate would be easy to implement and flexible, since there would not be a lot of bureaucratic overhead. But on the other hand, it would be unclear what its actual value is. It will all be based on volunteer work. It would be unclear what the responsibilities are, who makes decisions, who decides things. For the master's degree, it would be a lot clearer what the value is, since it would be an official degree. There would be dedicated resources, and there would be a formal decision-making process, but it would probably be a lot slower and harder to implement, since there's a lot of bureaucratic overhead, and it would be less flexible to adapt if necessary. And additionally, the degree might look different depending on the university, which could be a pro or could be a con, depending on how that actually turns out. Unfortunately, none of us can join the meeting, but we're happy to answer any questions and discuss anything offline. These are our email addresses. Thank you for watching.
Thank you to Julia, and as noted in the chat, huge thanks to Julia for working at this point whilst on maternity leave. And I'm sure we certainly all enjoyed the collaborator there, who I'm sure put in a lot of support and hard work to make their presentation happen. Our youngest speaker yet, indeed, something to celebrate. Maybe even a PhD student already. Now we have a talk from Rene van Bast, who's going to talk about the code refinery. So I'll hand over to him.
Thank you, and hello everybody from Norway. Let me just take a screen share here. And thanks so much to Michelle and co-organizers for putting together this session. It's really a pleasure to be part of this. And I'm looking forward to tell you a little bit about what we do in the Code Refinery project, why we do it, how it relates to fair research software, and where we want to go from here. Okay. So in the Code Refinery project, we teach tools and practices for the development of reproducible, reusable. So it's about research software. Some links to the website, to our past workshops. On the map, you see a couple of places we've been to. We are active in the Nordics and the Baltics, and I will tell you why. The 21 workshops here in the water, they have happened online. So we have, well, 2 years ago, we moved everything to online like everybody else. And also more about that in a minute. And our strategy statement, what we would like to be or become, we would like to become a hub for fair software practices. And currently we focus on the Nordic and Baltic countries, and this is because of funding or the history of our funding. We have started here in the Nordics, but our aim is to expand beyond this region. And we are now transitioning into becoming a community project with support from academic organizations. And we would like to offer something to organizations, to volunteers and teams, but also to learners. And for the organizations, really the opportunity to pool competencies. The thing that we try to offer to volunteers and teams is to offer them a community around teaching and skill development. And for learners, a hopefully welcoming and useful environment for learning many of the skills that are otherwise not part of an academic curriculum, through courses, hackathons, and the like. We exist since 2016. We have been funded by the Nordic e-infrastructure collaboration, and in the last 5 years we delivered 31 full workshops, and I will tell you on the next slide how a typical workshop looks like. And in these last 5 years, we have trained over 1,600 persons across all academic disciplines in Nordics, but also a little bit beyond. Many volunteers, instructors involved, many volunteer exercise leads and helpers. And I'm also happy to share the good news that we very recently got funding for 3 more years. So that was very encouraging. The typical curriculum is basic and collaborative version control. We really focus on collaboration. It's a code review. We teach social coding, software licensing, of course, FAIR principles, FAIR tools, reproducible research, Jupyter notebooks, how to document code, how to test code, modular code development, and some other lessons. All the lessons are Creative Commons. We really encourage reuse and contributions. And up to 2019, a typical workshop was 3-day full 3 days on site. But since 2020, we do this in 6 half days online. And here you can already find dates for 2022. And we really want to reach as many people as possible. A question that I often have is, how do we compare to the Carpentries? We are very much inspired by the Carpentries. Many of the techniques we use as well. I mean, the workshops are very similar in the teaching style. So exercise-driven, interactive, a lot of hands-on. But I see ourselves as the next step. So whereas Carpentries often target novices, our typical learner is somebody who already writes code or scripts in whatever language, but would like to take it to the next level, improve collaboration, improve reusability. And then what we would like to become is a kind of a bridging gap between the Carpentries and more specialist training. And in 2020, we moved online. This move to online workshops, I think, was very good for the project because it allowed us to really reach many more people. And some new concept has been introduced, like bringing an own breakout room or participating as a team or asynchronous question and answers. And these lessons learned are summarized in the blog post and in this recording linked on the slide. So I see I have like 3 more minutes. Just tell you something about what is our community. Our community is typically PhD students, researchers, postdocs. This is very tiny, but it shows that there is an imbalance in terms of disciplines. It's typically engineering, chemistry, physics, bioinformatics, computer science. We do not yet reach social sciences and humanities. There we need to really work on making the material more relevant, more accessible. Here's some overview over which language typically people bring. So that's a bit of a challenge. This is really cross different languages. We also then do surveys 3 to 6 months after our workshop, where we want to measure the impact. Did we actually achieve an improvement according to the different lessons? And also we here in this post-workshop survey, we asked learners whether after the workshop their code became more reusable, reproducible, modular, documented. Was it easier to collaborate? I'm very happy to see that many of the learners have introduced their colleagues to some of these tools in these workshops. Okay, final 2 slides. So FAIR principles have many aspects, and all of them are important. So there are principles and there are best practices and policies and standards and governance models, development on tools, and maybe I'm missing even some aspects. And it's so nice that we can now meet and discuss these different aspects. I have highlighted here training and mentorship because I think this is the place where our project can contribute to. And will be fun to later discuss how we can connect. Finally, some challenges and some future outlook. So we are about now to transition into a community project. We would like to expand beyond the Nordics and the Baltics. And our goal is within the next 2-3 years to become a non-profit organization so that we can carry this on even beyond the current funding horizon, and so that we can participate in projects as an own independent entity. We want to make it easier for organizations and individuals to join. We want to make it more motivating for them to join. For this, we will need to provide better credit, also to build a mentorship network. It would be really fun and interesting to design and carry out a fair software practices survey in the Nordics and beyond. And one challenge that we have to work on, and it's not easy, is community building. I think our biggest challenge right now is to build and maintain the community. Thanks so much for listening. And I see no question on the chat, but I think we will come back to them.
There was just one higher up about whether your training workshops are open for non-Nordic country researchers.
Yes, we have actually also, so now we stream the workshops, we record them, and yes, we open them up. We encourage participants to, it makes it very easy for us to scale if participating groups also bring helpers with them. And then it's very easy. So we have experience having participants from Germany, from Netherlands, South Africa. So yes. Would it make sense for us to become part of the Carpentries? This is something we are considering. So one possible outcome in the future is that this curriculum could become Carpentries curriculum. This is something we'll be working on. It's very possible. It might be a good way forward to give this more exposure.
Great, thank you. And we look forward to seeing all those future things eventuate, Radovan, with your 3 years of funding. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Now we have one last talk from Alexander Struck from DERSE. So I'll pass the chair over to him.
Thank you. That's not what I want to share. This is the slide you can hopefully see right now, searching for research software. I am very much interested in the discovery of existing solutions if someone had already solved the problem, and we may just have to find it. So I'm wondering what kind of skills do we already have, and which ones do we lack? Let's start on the left-hand side. Findability requires rich metadata and hopefully persistent identifiers, which is already covered by many guidelines and carpentry lessons. But we don't know right now how users actually use skills to search for software utilizing metadata. And sometimes I think we may lack terminology or ontologies to describe software and, well, teach them to possible reusers for how to look for them. We have hundreds of possible, let's say, locations or publication platforms for research software, but we don't really know how users would identify the relevant platform for their problem or domain. We have the not invented here syndrome, and what we may lack are incentives sometimes to well, invest resources to evaluate, well, to search for and then evaluate third-party software. And we already have publishing guidance in some guidelines, carpentry lessons, but we do not have search guidance to actually search for published software. That's my impression I get from the literature and well, actual search. I found one of the very few studies covering how to, well, actually find research software. And as you can see, many people or participants in the study still use a general purpose web search engines. Some ask colleagues for their opinion. Some even look for, well, software mentions in the scientific literature. And then it goes down from there to social help sites and so on. What I found is that in terms of skill, that the European Open Science, Cloud, Fair Skills initiatives mention something, that searching repositories and scientific databases may produce some results on software. The carpentry lessons mention that it would be easy to discover software by providing metadata. The top 10 fair things for research software mentioned that, yes, metadata, again, a repository and a persistent identifier would be helpful to rediscover published software. And the MIT libraries have some guidance on where to publish software with some hints on then where to look for it. What I would like to see in terms of skills is proper state-of-the-art report. If someone decided to write new software, which repositories did they search for existing solutions? Which domain relevant review papers did they consult on such software, and maybe which strategy was applied for web search? So we can have an idea as the readers of such software publishing paper. Is this a duplication of effort, or is this indeed a real first effort to solve a solution in software? That would be all from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alexander, and some really good points there about some of the other pieces we need to make this skills section work. That we need some supporting infrastructure to, I guess, mean that some of these skills don't need to be taught if the infrastructure is working better. Otherwise, at the moment, we probably need to teach a lot about how to find software to reuse it. But in the longer term, maybe that'll get solved another way. Any quick questions for Alexander or any of the speakers? Still arising? Otherwise, you can put them into the chat and people will answer those as well. Which brings us to the last section of today's BoF, which is a question about what next. So if you go down to the bottom of the shared notes document, there are 3 questions posed under the section called discussion notes. If you're on the middle of page 3. And the first question for us to think about it is what would be the focus of work if we continued this effort? In RDA, there's a pathway that can be followed where you've run a birds of a feather session to get some community discussion going. We found that there was some interest in pursuing this further, and we could then think about forming an interest group or a working group. And we have a web page already set up through RDA as a placeholder, and you can join the email list for that. There's links to that at the top and bottom of this document. But the question would be, if we went down that pathway, what would we really like to focus on? And it's fantastic that there's been a whole range of ideas put in there already, things around defining terminology, the actual skills needed, where these are already taught and to who and in what contexts. Are there any gaps? And do we need ways to evaluate fairness of research software as part of the training? So let me open the floor. We're such a small group that anyone can unmute and speak, or put up your hand or put something into the chat. But it would be great to hear some of the people who've put some of those ideas, or others flesh out a little bit more what they think could be a useful focus and why and how we would do it.
Well, okay, so Michelle, this is Dan. I mean, I guess I put in a bunch of questions kind of following what Alexander had started. And I don't know that there's really much more that I can say other than it seems like in order to think about this, there's lots of different questions you could answer, and they could lead the group into different directions or into subgroups or something else. And so I guess I was just thinking that it's a big challenge and trying to figure out how we could think of it in smaller pieces that could be attacked more.
Yeah, it's great to have Peter Nish here, because certainly when he's one of the co-chairs of Professionalizing Data Stewardship working group in RDA, and I've always admired their structure, where early on they identified 8 different questions that they were trying to answer, and then set up groups around those. So we could begin that way by breaking down into a number of sub-questions that needed addressing. Inputs from others, or maybe you might like to reflect more broadly on what we've heard today. Does it sound like there's some useful pieces happening in the research software skills and training sector? Are they beginning to overlap and provide each other with support or big leverage of each other in a meaningful way, such that we don't need this conversation? Or are there could we begin to see ways in which, some other joining or thinking about things differently or in different combinations could be helpful? So Radovan and Dan.
Yes, so one idea about training. So there are these different training efforts, and I'm sure there is some overlap, and that's good. And some of these training efforts happen in very different parts of the world. One thing that could be really fun to try would be that we try co-teach at different, so I don't know, like some co-refinery people would actually help co-teaching at USRSE. The USRSE curriculum and vice versa could be a fun way of networking, but also then learning how do the other initiatives do it? How can we then take some of the material and reuse it in other contexts? So that could be a fun thing to try.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but I'll say one question that I have is, would it make sense for this group to actually prepare curricula, or would this group more be preparing modules that would be used in other curricula? So in particular, I guess the thing that I'm thinking is that there are so many groups that are training different kinds of software development. And one way of thinking here would be that really what's needed is to insert some idea of the FAIR principles and recognition of what FAIR means and how it could be met, as opposed to having an entirely new curriculum.
You?
Yeah, so there's maybe to follow up on the point that Dan made, was that I wonder where, you know, a starting point is to look at the skill set that the US RSE have put together, and to say, okay, is that, you know, how much of an overlap is there? Is that a subset of that thing, or is it, you know, something which has got that there are extra things that they need to know? If you're really about sort of, and again, to sort of drill it down in terms of saying, is this about, in some respect, the curriculum to write FAIR software, which, you know, if you kind of just to really kind of give it that clear scope there as well. That, I think, is one way of one sort of good starting point to think about.
Yeah, that was certainly some of the original thinking, whether that would be helpful to have that kind of curriculum, so that when an initiative like Laura Malloy's, you know, want to extend into software, and they're looking around for existing pieces that they can use, you know, is there something that's got some kind of level of community support that's common across a whole lot of initiatives that makes sense for them to slot into their work?
Again, I think it's the other thing that it often does work best, you know, that it's good to work on the shoulders of giants, when you know, that instead of kind of trying to build things completely from scratch, kind of look at similar initiatives and to kind of then say, okay, well, things are the same here, but some parts the same, but some parts are different. So, for example, the exercise, you know, that Dan and the rest of the team and Paula have led on, you know, kind of looking first at the FAIR principles and then saying, well, yes, to a point, these principles hold for software, but there are the variations, and that's a really good exercise.
Laura?
Just to express agreement with some of those ideas, and to reiterate that one of the purposes that the terms FAIR Skills terminology can be used for is to benchmark. So say Party A has a group of training materials of various formats and scales of ambition, and Group B has another set of training materials. And we're wondering how cohesive those are, how equivalent they are. One of the ways that the terminology can be used is as a benchmarking schema to allow mapping of those kinds of groups, and to see if these materials add up to a more cohesive, a fuller curriculum, or whether there's repetition, whether there are gaps in provision, this kind of stuff as well. So if anybody is interested in working on that kind of mapping exercise, then, you know, please get in touch and I'll do my best to help.
Thanks, Laura. It's certainly useful to think about it as one of the avenues we could use to further explore some of this work.
I mean, sometimes it's useful to just have we've found this in the education group, for example, that when we have people drawn together under a particular task, that tends to start a ball rolling, and it gets people working together on something quite specific and limited in the first instance, that gets the team working together, and then you can report back on that and expand into greater things. So yeah, I've been trying to think of coherent, modular pieces of work that could get us moving forward.
I think USRSE are also thinking about work that they can continue on. So none of them could be here today because of the time zones, but certainly that that working group, the education training work is quite active. And as you can see from their talk, have done a lot of work and are thinking about how they could broaden that to involve, for example, some RSEs in discussions to help identify what curriculum might look like. Dan?
Yeah, so I could be wrong. I've just been watching the US RSE education and training, but I don't actually think it's done any training at this point. I think it's been doing lots of planning and lots of talking. So I think there's still, if I'm correct, then there's still lots of scope for adding new materials and kind of thinking about how things should be organized. But I could be wrong.
Also in the notes section, there's a second question which we're seeking group input on what other initiatives should be involved. Great to have quite a wide range listed there, who I presume providing different types of software trainings. So could add to the curriculum. Any other thoughts on the types of initiatives who might really contribute or benefit from this work? Please add any other ideas that you have. Got a few people adding things in there. And then the final question, really gets down to what would be some more concrete next steps. Sorry, let me go back. Hugh, did you still have your hand up?
No, I think the only thing I could, this is a bit hopelessly vague, but I could definitely see people within EOSC again being interested in this, but they'd be interested. Can they contribute usefully? Is the other is the thing I'm trying to think about, and it's just I need to stop. It's a bit late for me. I need to stop and think about who would be the right people there. Who would be the right organizations within the multiple EOSC groups to reach out to.
Yeah, that's correct. We should include them. And certainly there are 3 new task forces that are starting up around now that have some kind of people focus. I think one of them was more on careers, but careers is a key part because identifying common competencies can lead to the professionalization of RSEs or other roles. But I can't remember the other 2. I can't even remember exactly what the 3 were, but maybe 1 or 2 of them would be more relevant. So then we get to the last question, which is really about how would we proceed forward. So the formal steps from here would be a number of us thinking about how we would in fact structure an interest group or working group. If you're not familiar with RDA structure, interest groups, I think, someone correct me if I get this wrong, but are more broad umbrellas that don't have particular milestones that they're working towards, but really just keep engendering conversation on this topic for some time, whereas working groups are time limited. They usually run for 18 months and identify some specific goals. So if people have found this conversation useful and enlivening and would be interested in working in a smaller group to think about what exactly the focus would be, we've got some great ideas. Maybe there's some potential projects we could start working around, particularly like terminology, as Laura said, or maybe US RSE might come back with some other defined pieces of work. Then a smaller group of us would start fleshing that out, deciding if we wanted to be an interest group or working group, and then putting together a proposal to RDA to become that. As I said, we have got a website set up already as a placeholder. So if you're simply interested in staying aware of this conversation, you can join that group, which just puts you on the email list so that if we do proceed, then you're in the loop. So if you'd like to be involved, please contact myself or Hugh, or if you just have more thoughts, we welcome more inputs. So any final comments or reflections from people on anything that we've covered today or possible next steps? Hugh?
Yeah, so I think if I would suggest that there's enough interest here, definitely to set up an interest group, to because the interest group doesn't necessarily mean that people are, you know, you're not promising anything. It's another way of putting it. It's a talking shop. Is things. So you don't have to kind of say, oh, we're going to get X done. And it sounds to me as if there is interest here. It's just more a matter of, I think people need a little bit more time to figure out, okay, what are the concrete next steps? So, you know, having an interest group just gives you that freedom and space to do that. And of course, the other thing to note is that it doesn't have to, interest groups don't have to just meet at plenaries. You know, things can happen at you know, at our own pace going forward.
Thanks, Hugh. Good point. So that brings us to the end then today, but I would like to take some time to thank all of our speakers and everyone who's been involved today, particularly people who've done things at strange hours. Thank you as always to RDA for having provided the plenary in which this discussion can take place. And I'd also like to thank the Wellcome Trust who support this work, support the Research Software Alliance in its work, and some of its work on FAIR for Research software, and including our work to look at how we implement FAIR for Research software, how we make it a reality through a piece that we call a FAIR for Research software roadmap. So if this particular discussion continued to grow on FAIR for Research software or more broader research software skills and training curriculums, then we can certainly sit within some of our broader interests and be supported that way. So thank you to Wellcome Trust for their support for that work. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all in some of the other sessions, or there's some great networking things you can join over the plenary, and there's offline ways to interact through the Hoover platform. So I hope you're all enjoying it and see more of you in the next few days. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for asking questions. It's great to see so many people here. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.